So I'm going to start with I don't know if this is like a long question, but I feel like this is something of my entry point into your work, and frame some of the rest of the questions that I'm going to ask you. But I wanted to really start by talking in some ways about three things that I think come together in your work, which I think are engineering, fashion, and art. But I think the thing that links these three things is the body, and I think the body as a site, or the body as a stage in which all the narratives that you're interested in play out. So it seems like the body is where identity and reality are constructed for you. So in a way, I wanted to start by asking you to talk more about the importance of the body in your work. And so is the body where your work and your ideas kind of begin? Is that where you start?
Yeah, actually, kind of it just remind me of my art journey as an artist at the very beginning, because a lot of my work at the beginning were quite focused on the female body, like and also feminism, and also the image of woman being objective, like observed by men, and that kind of hierarchy in the feminism world. So but then later on, when I started to do more research on or about the body and about the identity, I realized it's not only the woman's world, it's also about who we are as a person, and also different identity and different culture, different differences. And also it says a lot about the world we live in. Then I started to researching on other identities, and I discovered the concept of transhumanism, and which I found very intriguing because it resonates with me, because I feel like the concept of building human evolution in a way that we can engineer in the body. And then so I thought, okay, now we'll be able to engineer or change our body. That can enable us more in a culture kind of or society structure, because we all have different bodies, and that represents our background, our culture, our gender. It says a lot of things. So what if we'd be able to change the body, and would that is that going to be a better system for us? Would it create sort of equality? So all of these questions for me that kind of make me to start my work. Yeah.
Yeah, listening to you talk about that makes me think of Donna Haraway, the Cyber Feminist Manifesto, and a little bit of Shulamith Firestone. And I think there was a real intention in that early cyber feminism that technology would be a real, like a liberating force, and that seems to be what you're saying as well, which is there's a lot of positivity. It's very, your approach seems to be, or is it fair to say that your approach is tech cyber positive?
That's a really good word, cyber positive. Yeah, I wish I can say that, because more I research on the technology and the technologies that can actually help us. For example, in the health system, we have limbs that help us to work better and then enable us the physical strength. That's how I see technology side, and then I hope it can help us to be better us. But then at the same time, yeah, there are like different conspiracy about technophobia and all of this, but I do see in the bright side of this.
Mm, interesting. And that piece of your work that's to do with fashion and garments and clothing and construction. But I think you touched on it there again. You know, this really, I think, it is what is at the heart of that, to do with identity, and is identity um, the big issue in your work in some ways, like dismantling identity or reconstructing it?
Yeah, that is the core of my work. Yeah, like I just explained, how I see transhumanism and see how human body in the future.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning of my master's, and I did think about, because my course was about fashion, and I've been trained in fashion, so I think about the body a lot. But then what was really interesting for me is the things we wear kind of represents different identities, and it says a lot. It's not about the functionality anymore, or only about functionality. A lot of the clothes, a lot of the wearing is about identity, it's about who we are. But then if you think about the future perspective, maybe we don't need to wear clothes. We can wear all of these very high tech devices that enable us to be better ourselves. That's how I initiate the concept. And also, if for example, to be more bold, to be more like, to just not think about the body, because what is here, what make you you is not only about your body, it's about your consciousness as well. So I just wish that I can create a system or create a device or different devices that enable yourself to connect with your true self and then with your consciousness, not just about the appearance.
And as you're speaking, I'm wondering in a way about some of the writing from the CCRU, and specifically a writer called Sadie Plant. And she seems to suggest that, sometimes in her early writing, that she talks about posthumanism and transhumanism, and she sees the human as, in some ways, I think, like the weakest part of the equation, and or the most fallible part of the system, and that the post-human needs to sort of move further and further away from the human itself in order to have a chance of utopia.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that idea is kind of dark, and I feel like your work sort of plays with that, because sometimes your work looks very dark and sort of dystopian, but sometimes there's so much utopia in it as well, and so I'm kind of interested in how you sort of you kind of wrestle with that, and what your relationship to that idea of the human is. Like, do you think it needs to diminish, or are you making things, is your technology making things more human?
Yeah, you need to send me the book. It sounds very interesting. Yeah. I do think about that a lot. And also, this reminds me of, I just had a talk. I got invited to have a talk back to RCA. And then one of the students come up with a question, because I did explain about a lot of my work and about transhumanism, about maybe we can kind of like in the future will be able to live without our limitation, without this body, and we'd be able to, for example, conscious transfer, and then we'd be able to live in the feed or cloud. But he asked me a question about, so all of your work is pretty much is from human perspective. And would us be able to kind of think about this outside of human perspective? It's interesting idea to just maybe like forget that we are in this body, we are something else, but that's beyond our limitation again. I don't know, like but then to answer this question, I want to kind of talk back about the consciousness part, because consciously what's going on in the brain is something we have very limited knowledge about. But it's I do think that if we able to evolve to different species, then we wouldn't understand that species. Would that still be human? That's another question. Yeah, like us when we look back, sapiens, back to, I don't know, before we're human, they probably wouldn't understand us.
Yeah, and I think your work sort of brings up a lot of questions about the relationship, an interrelationship between the mind and consciousness and the body. So you often seem in the process of changing the physical, or implanting consciousness into a new physical vessel. But there's always this question that arises, I think, which is like, can the consciousness really be the same if you place it in a new body? And I think that's similar to what you're saying about inhabiting animals and not being able to understand them. You know, like if we inhabit an entirely cyborg body, would be understanding would be completely different.
Yeah.
So where does like that idea of consciousness like sit in your work? You know, and also in relation to your idea of utopia, like, are you trying? Is that consciousness at the heart of it? Is that what kind of makes us human for you? And is that the kind of the part I'm interested in?
I don't really have a question to be what is utopian and what is the ideal utopian. I do see that in my recent work, A Book of Relevation, I see what we're going through now, I think is destruction mode, like a period of time that I see a lot of problems of our society. I see a lot destruction going on, but maybe it's just a phase that we have to go through as human. We have this complex society. We live in a very complex system. We're building like I don't know how to explain, but maybe then, but then in the later stage in the think what did I call it? And there is like a gold work, and then I call it body temple, and then I render different gods. There's like Shiva, and there is Jesus in the middle, but they in like very robotic form. And then there's Buddha in the bottom, and I pose them in the like religious pose. So it reminds people of their religions, but not to idolize them, idolize them. But I want to create this kind of future temple that we still have beliefs, but that belief is not to worship any type of god. And then there are different fractals in the background, because this kind of relates to my early experience of hallucination. But I do think we kind of can tap to different world. to a different dimension when we unwired our brain, and that's kind of gap through to a higher dimension, and that's a gap through to kind of consciousness.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, my next question was to you was really going to be what is your relationship to the psychedelic or the psychedelic experience?
Yeah.
I feel like there is a history there of psychedelics and technology, but I get the sense from what you're saying that the psychedelics have an important part to play in the idea of sort of consciousness. But yeah, so the psychedelic experience has influenced your work, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think yeah, you've influenced me a lot. Because as a Chinese, you come to UK and I experience all of this like very different things. Was very different for me. It come to different stage of my work. At the beginning was about liberation. Was about you be able to free yourself, and you see different, like it was a culture shock for me, and about liberation, about gender, about you be able to explore your sexuality and your sexual life. And then later on the experience tended to like I said, it tended to understand how technology can change our life and how technology can help us to change ourselves, and about the dimensional transformation. Because after that experience, I want to go on to listen to different talks and science talk about psychedelics and hallucination. And there are good side and bad side about this, of course, but then there are researchers come up saying that it actually help people um, to make help with a mental disease and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of focus. I was trying to focus on about the fractal side, because the geometry of the things you see when you own psychedelics is so different. So I do think that our brain process different information when we're different, when we're at that state. It's like it's like you're trying to put information in a quantum computer, but then you put that information to a very early computer, and the early computer cannot understand what is going on with all this information. But it's very important for us to kind of understand and kind of yeah.
Yeah, I'm sort of reminded that William Gibson in Neuromancer describes cyberspace as a consensual hallucination. And I'm wondering if like your interest in sort of cyberspace or virtual realities, new realities, is kind of related to that. That you think that there's a similarity in the psychedelic experience and the experience in a kind of computer created reality. Because it seems sometimes that your work is really like thinking a lot about the future. It's speculating, but I think, but to what extent also is your work trying to build that future? I feel like you're trying to create, or you think there's an opportunity there. Maybe this speaks more to some of the engineering side,
Yeah.
your interest, but are you trying to sort of build that better future in your work?
Yeah. Yeah, because I do, for the clothes that we're wearing, like of the things that we wear, it stayed the same form for very long time, since like at the beginning we discovered how to weave, how to sew, and until now we still have the basic form of wearing. What I trying to do, I think, because there are robotics, there are engineered the building humanoids, and that can kind of help us or they are the stage of service robots. They can help us to clean, or they can help us to greet people, but they are different institutions. They focus on developing the intelligence, and that kind of I don't know, like I feel like there's a chance that if we can merge with them, that's a very, very, very bold idea. But if we can merge with humanoids, become cyborg, because that's what I'm interested in. And then the wearing is like we are wearing the machines, we are wearing the devices. I do think we're kind of already cyborg because we live with our phone, with our laptop all the time. Yeah, that
Right.
makes cyborg. Then yeah, we should have a chance to be able to wear in the devices and merge with the machine. That is a crazy idea, but I would love to work on it. Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of body modification and body augmentation always makes me think of cyberpunk. And I think that maybe the cyberpunk look has influenced your work. I think maybe like this most recent piece, "Stop Killer Robots,"
Yeah.
is is kind of like a cyberpunk looking piece. Maybe we should just talk a little bit about what that piece, that garment of clothing actually looks like, because I recently watched the David Cronenberg film Crimes of the Future, and he's he's got this really sort of techno fetishist imagery in that film. Surgical tools that look like they've been made from the bones of imaginary animals, or sort of lab printed muscle tissue. Um, and so I'm wondering where the kind of look or just the aesthetic for your Stop Killer Robot came from, because the garment kind of, it almost looks like it's been influenced by black metal logos, or some of it looks like bone, some of it looks like flesh, some of it looks very technological. So where does that aesthetic come from?
I think it goes back to the movies that I really love, like Men in Black. The gun they use, they're very bio looking, but then also Uchiha Higer and Alien movies, a lot of sci-fi movies influenced me a lot. But the main reference or inspiration from, I think it's from the idea of bio looking bio creature that merge with weapon or pet looking. So there's always biological form, and there's always mechanical form, and then that is a combination in my work. Because yeah, I really love Aisha Higer, and then there's a lot of sculpture and drawings he did, that concept to make something that is bio, but it's a weapon, but it's a spaceship. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the idea. Yeah.
yeah, that's great. I can really see that reference in that
Yeah.
work, and I feel like the kind of presence of that is also consciousness changing as well, and that the kind of the fusion of those things is like really important to how like you want to um, sort of ask questions about how to change consciousness as
Yeah.
well. But so I feel like in the back of your work it is, there's always this kind of issue of maybe like the singularity, or more, or just the really accelerating speed of technology, and that there appears to be like a whole set of really powerful ideologies that seem to be in control or in power of most of the technology at the moment. And it seems to be that they are sort of leading us down something of a sort of a slightly dark path in technology. The kind of Silicon Valley style version of transhumanism seems a bit like maybe a bit dystopian. And I feel like your work, and especially sort of the feminist aspects of it, are that you're trying to sort of either wrestle power from where it currently lies in the technological world, or you're like offering a vision of a kind of alternative, that it doesn't have to be a certain way. Um, and I think that's kind of like, that's really interesting. I feel like your work is like really um, sort of offering alternative visions for how technology can be used. But how do you think? Is that true? Do you think technology is being used in a, or is going down in a dark path at the moment that you're trying to change, or do you think it's more um, even than that?
Mm, it does. Really complex to say technology is good or bad. But what is shocking to me was to finish the my inspiration for the killer robots. I was reading like an article online, and I really like shocked by the image of they trying to train humanoids, the robots, to be as trained to train them to be a soldier. Um, and then there was an image of the robot was holding a gun like this. So that's why I call the work "Stop the Killer Robot." And then later on, there's a movement. There's a website as well, "Stop the Killer Robots." We need to stop like putting our um, smartest people and engineers and resources on building these weapons to hurt each other. But then it's difficult to change human nature, because I think it is very complex that um, how do you stop a war? And we live in this age. Why should there be a war? We experience a lot from the First World War, Second World War, and then now there's still wars going on. And but it's very complex to understand or to solve this question, because why we fight, because our differences, because we're fighting for resources. It's just very I think it's very difficult to change human nature, but you cannot say is technology uh, is tech good or bad. I think it's the human, it's the system. Yeah.
Yeah. But and do you see like your like the technology that you use, or the work, do you see it being able to change human nature? Is that kind of one of the things that you're interested in? Is that when you change the body or place something on the body, that it changes human nature?
Mm, I think that would kind of change, like we wouldn't be human anymore.
Hmm.
Or wouldn't be the human, like it would be different species.
One thing I read yesterday is that the creator of the Oculus Rift virtual reality headset, who's left the company now, has just created a new headset, which will make it possible for people who use the headset to die in real life if they die in the game. A bit
Wow.
like a bit like the anime Sword Arts Online, which also has that as the premise for its story. And, I don't know if anyone's going to buy this headset, but the fact that it exists um, seems to point towards something, some like collapsing of like
Yeah.
the difference between the virtual and the real. And it's interesting seeing like the stop killer robot garment physically in the gallery space, because I feel like your work exists in both the kind of in real life and in virtual space. Um, uh, and I kind of want to ask you a question about is there a difference when you approach making work that that's in real space and in the virtual, or is it like the same thought process for you?
When I first discovered 3D tools, I kind of like I don't know, like I liberated my hands, I would say, because I used to really hate to put my ideas to 2D sketches, because in my brain that they always come in 3D form. So it's very natural for me to use a computer to scope or engineer on the digital world, and then use 3D printing to make them come to life, um, to make them physical. But I always do it on the computer to visualize everything. But then to the engineer parts, you will come to a different prototypes. You come different attempts and to see if the size is right, the tools right, and then it will be a lot physical engineering. Yeah.
Yeah, and is that your engineering background influencing your art practice, in the sense that you kind of prototype and test? Is that's kind of how you make artwork?
Yeah, I don't really have an engineer background. The engineer was actually was back in China. I did a fashion and engineer. They called that name, and then they'll teach you how to kind of um like work fashion industry, for example, to manage a factory or make it everything more efficient. But then yeah, but during my master course, I worked a lot with engineers. Yeah, was because I really want to kind of build this work on robotics, work on engineering, make things that is transformative. Yeah.
And what about fashion then? We've seen some like really high profile examples. I can think of sort of Burberry and also like Balenciaga, who are like moving into the virtual space.
Mm.
And it seems like virtual fashion is something that they're really interested in exploring.
Yeah.
Uh, so do you think that like fashion like is really gonna like? Do you think there's like a something interesting in the way that fashion is entering those spaces? And have you seen anything interesting in the fashion world in those virtual spaces?
I think Balenciaga did a virtual game, like they publish a website and then you can go on and look in the space and the game they built. Um, I think it's very interesting, but I feel like they could do more because they have all this money, but then it's a kind of they just move the physical stage to a digital stage without using like a more imagination. But then as a brand, I guess they have to like we spent all of this money. I want our the things that the products to show that's understandable. But they are yeah, the game is really well made. But I feel like they could do more. But I think after a few years, definitely, I think a lot of brands will have a digital show.
And you are you looking at that a lot when and thinking about your work and the world? Do you often look at what like the industry is doing? Um, and are those where your ideas are coming from? Like, are you still really influenced by like the fashion world and the tech world, or are you kind of looking at other spaces other than that for inspiration?
For inspiration wise, um, yeah, I do look. I do look in the tech more than in fashion. Because I would initiate my thought process or my work first of how this could be mean something, or I think it's more artistic approach rather than fashion approach.
Mm.
But then yeah, as a brand, I'm trying to kind of work on the company side or brand side, and we will have customers and clients that would ask for it, then I would think about the industrial side. But I think the people who come to me, clients come to me, they do love my kind of tech approach.
So, yeah, and you mentioned like being influenced by film as well, and I think that there's a lot of play with like fiction in your work as well, which is really interesting, and like being able to imagine a new sort of type of like future, which feels really exciting. So is that kind of something that you does your work function as like a form of like speculation or like forecasting about the future? Do you think a lot about the future when making your work?
Yeah, I do get inspired by, uh, for example, Neuralink when they had the first um publication, like the first video that come out, and I was really shocked by by the concept behind it, and then it kind of um yeah, it kind of helped me to kind of start another work, and I do look at the different like tech come out, and then it will help me to think about what if I can do this and that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so maybe I'll just sort of I'll ask you sort of just a final question based on that, which is what are you looking at next? And what are you interested in looking at for your next project?
For the next project, I'm kind of building a collection of kind of it's expanding of the gender transformative suit. And there's different like gadgets and devices that move around that expand the body shape. So yes, that's the main focus. And also I feel like as we discussed before, there are a lot of things that's focused on the body and the mind. I think later on I'll be focused on the mind as well. Like for example, maybe a devices that or devices that work as the Neuralink, but it will
Mm.
be like aesthetically in my approach.
It's really interesting that you mentioned gender there, because I think that play and disruption of gender has existed in sort of like the very early history of the internet, even on some of the most primitive like message boards. There was immediately an attempt uh, to kind of dismantle and question and explore gender. So it sounds like you're taking these kind of these really early sort of technological themes and bringing them into like the most advanced forms of technology.
Yeah. Yeah, this reminds me of some very early game, and then you can be able to choose your avatar and then like dress yourself virtually. Um, yeah, it's very interesting.
So Abby, I'm gonna finish up there, but it's been really fascinating talking to you about your work. So thank you very much.
Likewise, we're honored to talk to you too.